All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping into the period from 1648 to 1815. This is an era where the very rules of knowledge, power, and society got a complete and total rewrite. And for all you AP students out there, listen up. While this unit might feel a little on the short side, it carries the exact same weight on your exam as every other one, a full 10 to 15%. The concepts here are dense, and they are absolutely crucial to understand. So, this is the big question for this whole era. And I know it might sound a little out there, right? But trust me, it's not. We are going to follow a direct line from the invention of the telescope all the way to the halls of government and the first sparks of revolution. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to see how one huge idea, the idea that the world can be understood with reason and evidence, kicked off a massive chain reaction that touched every single part of European life. Okay, let's start with the spark itself. This was a huge fundamental shift, a move away from just trusting what ancient authorities like Aristotle and the church told you, and toward trusting what you could see with your own eyes, prove with your own experiments, and figure out with your own math. Now, this change right here was the first major crack in the old system. See, the geocentric model wasn't just about astronomy, it was theological. It put humanity right at the center of God's creation. But the heliocentric model, based on cold, hard math, basically said, nope, Earth is just another planet. This was a direct shot at the authority of tradition. And this didn't happen overnight. It was more like a slow burn over 150 years. You had Copernicus doing the math, then Kepler came along and refined it, Galileo showed up with a telescope to give actual visual proof, and finally Newton tied it all together with one universal law. All of a sudden, the universe wasn't some mysterious, divinely guided place. It was a predictable machine that followed laws. And this is so important. They didn't just find new stuff. They invented a whole new way to find stuff. The scientific method meant that truth wasn't just handed down from on high anymore. It was something anyone could go out and find for themselves, as long as they had evidence and logic. And you can think of this new method as having two main engines, right? You had Francis Bacon, who argued for the inductive approach. Start with what you can see and measure, and build your theories up from there. And then you had René Descartes, who championed the deductive approach. Start with one single truth you can't possibly doubt, like I think, therefore I am, and use pure logic to build everything else from that. Together, they laid the foundation for modern science. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, once you've proven that the natural world operates on these predictable, rational laws, the next question is kind of obvious, isn't it? Does human society work that way too? And that one question, well, that's the beating heart of the Enlightenment. And that's exactly what John Locke did. He basically took Newton's playbook for physics and applied it directly to politics. He argued that our basic rights, life, liberty, property, they aren't gifts from a king, they're natural. They're granted by a creator, and they exist before any government is even formed. And this leads directly to the super radical idea of the social contract. Suddenly, government isn't just a given, it's a deal. Its authority comes from the consent of the people it governs. And, here's the kicker, if a ruler violates those natural rights and becomes a tyrant, the deal is off, the contract is broken, and the people have the right to form a new government. You can see the seeds of revolution being planted right there. Naturally, the same rational way of thinking got pointed right at the economy. The old mercantilist system saw wealth like a pizza. There's only so much to go around, and states had to fight for the biggest slice. But Adam Smith came along and said that was totally irrational. He argued that if you just let people pursue their own self-interest in a free market, this invisible hand would guide the economy to actually create more wealth for everyone. And here's the thing. These ideas didn't just sit in some dusty library. No way. They exploded into the public through all these new social spots. The encyclopedia tried to collect all human knowledge in one place. Salons hosted lively debates, and coffee houses became these incredible places where pretty much anyone could discuss these radical new theories. For the very first time, this created a public sphere, an arena of public opinion. Right, so these debates weren't just for fancy intellectuals. They actually started to filter down and change how everyday people lived their lives. What they bought, the art they looked at, even how they thought about raising their kids. First off, Europe's population just exploded. I mean, just look at that jump. 70 million more people in 100 years. That's huge. And it wasn't because people were having more babies, it's because they stopped dying so young. You had better food, like the potato, the plague was finally fizzling out, and you had the very first public health measures. It all meant more people were surviving to adulthood.
So, you've got this population boom, especially this growing middle class with a little extra cash. And what happens? A consumer revolution. People started buying things not just because they needed them, but because they wanted them. This led to a whole new focus on the home as a private space, and people started to define themselves by what they owned, not just by their village or their faith.
You can literally see this change in thinking just by looking at the art. You go from this super emotional, dramatic, over-the-top Baroque style, which was all about showing the power of kings in the church, and it gives way to this clean, simple, logical neoclassical style, which celebrated Enlightenment values like reason and civic duty. Okay, so if you're an old-school absolute monarch and all of this is happening, society is changing, ideas are spreading, what do? If you don't adapt, you risk getting overthrown. So their solution was to try and get ahead of the curve. So they adapt. They start using the language of the Enlightenment, and they create this kind of hybrid. We call it enlightened absolutism. But let's be clear, the goal was never to give up power. No way. It was about using reason and reform as tools to make their own rule more effective. And, at the end of the day, more secure.
And this quote from Frederick the Great, it says it all. The whole justification for being an absolute ruler changed, dramatically. It's no longer about divine right from God. Now rulers like Frederick are arguing their power is justified because it's useful for the people and for the state.
But, and this is a big but, these reforms always had their limits. A monarch might simplify the laws but keep serfdom to make the nobles happy. They'd talk a big game about rights but then turn around and brutally crush a peasant rebellion. Joseph II in Austria, he was the most radical of the bunch, but his reforms were so fast they just tick everyone off and fell apart. The lesson here is simple. Power and stability always came first.
All right, let's pull all this together. Why should you care about these 167 years, from the end of the 30 Years' War to Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo? Why do they matter so much for the world we are all living in right now?
Well, here's what it all boils down to. This period is when reason and evidence officially took over from tradition as the ultimate source of authority. It created the very idea of public opinion. It built the entire intellectual framework for the American and French revolutions. And it forged the system of competitive nation-states that, still defines a lot of global politics to this day. This era really did set the stage for our modern world, inventing ways of thinking we still use every single day. And that leaves us with a final big question to chew on, especially when you look at all the incredible transformations happening all around us right now.